And we are coming back to Serbia, which held a general strike on Friday, called by the organizers a general civil disobedience, to which the citizens of Serbia have been called by students on a blockade. As the anti-government protests intensify across whole Serbia, the country's president held a counter-rally to demonstrate that both him and the ruling Serbian Progressive Party, which he founded, still enjoy public support. To unpack the difficult and complicated situation in Serbia, we are joined now by Spasimir Domaradzki, political scientist, University of Warsaw and Institute of Central Europe. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming to the studio.
Thank you for the invitation.
So we understand it is sort of a generational protest, and we would like to understand where does this resolve of the youth stems from? And with Alexander Vučić at least officially taking a EU towards, a turn towards EU, is it, what does this protest actually mean? Is it a lack of simply trust for Alexander Vučić and his party?
Well, let's put it that way. Well, we observe that already for over 2 months we have these protests, and the youth, the students, are actually the only group that is not sufficiently infiltrated by Vučić's regime. Serbia is one of the textbook examples of state capture, in which you have nominally a democratic system with political elites that theoretically organize elections. But if you look at Vučić's experience, you will realize that he actually treats elections like a tool which allows him to continue remaining in power. In this sense, if we even talk about a democratic system, it's most essential mechanism of refreshing political elites is not working. In that sense, the students' protests are an example of how those who are not directly dependent by the regime can mobilize themselves when they see that actually the system does not only have the problem of taking over and steering the whole reality, but also that let's say these pathological political practices leads to disasters as the one in Novi Sad. And this disaster, this building tragedy that took place is an example how easily in such a reality you can become a victim of the system. And this is why the protests longed for already over 2 months. What happened yesterday is even more important because this is spilled over. It's spilled over throughout the whole society, and people are convinced that this model needs to have certain limits. Vučić sensed that the situation is deteriorating because several weeks ago he mentioned that Syrian scenario is not possible in Belgrade, but what you see with the persistence of the current protests is that indeed certain changes might appear on the horizon.
It's difficult to discredit young people which are clearly not affiliated with any political force, and also those young people inviting different social groups to join them, which is happening, by the way. So now Alexander Vučić has taken an effort to undermine the credibility of young people, saying that various forces, instructors from Western Eastern countries are trying to manipulate the public opinion. But is it working, and what are his chances of winning in this conflict?
Well, let's put it that way. Vučić is replicating the Russian rhetoric, which could be heard just yesterday, where the argument is that there is an active political operation aiming to destabilize. But this is every time when we see people's voices expressed in captured states, in authoritarian regimes, that the immediate response of the regime is that it is not possible that the people can protest, it must be steered from outside. outside. So in that sense, Vucic's yesterday's rally in Jagodina is just another example which he practiced already for almost 13 years, and we need to be aware that he knows perfectly how this model works. He uses several tactics. The first one is to threaten, to oppress, to exert physical pressure on the protesters, to crush them, and on the other hand, to pretend that he is still, that the Serbians are behind him.
So what can happen in Serbia? Can it be practically the same as in Georgia's scenario, with people being arrested, simply taken out from the streets, with any opposition persecuted? What do you imagine can happen in Serbia now?
Maybe not the same scale as in Georgia, but we see examples of these attempts to beat people, to exert pressure. There are the arguments of the government officials who claim that all these things happen because of miscommunication. So there is, on one hand, awareness that we know what we do. On the other hand, we need to have a justification why we do it. And eventually, the hope is that these events will simply get silenced with the time. The problem is, however, that the public mobilization this time is much serious than during previous protests, and we need to remember that
those protests are really telling by being silent, by simply.
Exactly.
It's very telling. It's really loud.
It is, and on the other hand, the Serbs, I would say, persistently try to use this only tool in democratic countries, the peaceful protests, to express their opinions on what is happening in politics when they know that the political system doesn't function efficiently.
So Vucic says that the future of Serbia is not going to be decided on the street. But so what can happen now? I mean, where will this tug of war end? Do you imagine perhaps or expect European leaders to take a lead? After all, Serbia is a candidate country. We have seen Donald Tusk coming to Serbia speaking in Serbian. So European Union is very involved in this process, but somehow Vucic is also, he has to be also responding to any pressure from EU as well.
Indeed. However, we need to remember that on one hand, we should not vest too much hope within the EU in terms of meddling in internal affairs. The EU is very well aware that, especially when the country is outside of the EU, what it can do is it can send political signals, it can send certain statements, but it will not interfere into what is happening in Serbia. On the other hand, it is much more important that, in a sense, these protests are also about the future of Serbia. It's geopolitical orientation, it's the civilizational positioning, because the options on the table are only two, either in or out of the EU. Serbia is surrounded by the EU, is surrounded by NATO. Serbia is the only country actually in the Balkans that consciously conducts a policy that undermines its road towards the EU, the current political elites. And in that sense, we see that although Vucic is the EU's partner in Serbia, on the other hand, he is also the person who quite consciously sabotages all the Serbian efforts that are supposed to be done in order to come closer to a membership in the EU.
Spasimir Domaradzki, thank you very much for your insights, for your expertise, for sharing it with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Political scientist from University of Warsaw Institute of Central Europe was our guest tonight. Thank you very much for watching, and please stay tuned to TVP World for more news and for more comments.